Okay, I'm just gonna start chapter 9 again because I didn't want to edit the other one. So if you're watching the other one and now you're here on chapters 9 and 10, you can skip ahead if you want, or you can just re-listen. Apologies to my friends. Okay, chapter 9, chapter 10 in this video, and then I'll make a new video for the next 5 chapters, but probably not until Thursday, because I know that none of you will be on will be at that point just yet. Let me just see where we're going to. Okay, here we go. So chapter 9. Every light in the hall was ablaze, every lamp turned as high as it could be without smoking the chimney or threatening explosion. The lamps were fixed at intervals against the wall, encircling the whole room. Someone had gathered orange and lemon branches, and with these fashioned graceful festoons between. The dark green of the branches stood out and glistened against the white muslin curtains which draped the windows and which puffed, floated, and flapped — there's a balanced sentence — at the capricious will of a stiff breeze that swept up from the Gulf. It was Saturday night, a few weeks after the intimate conversation held between Robert and Madame Ratignolle on their way from the beach. An unusual number of husbands, fathers, friends had come down to stay over Sunday, and they were being suitably entertained by their families. With the material help of Madame Lebrun, the dining tables had been removed to one end of the hall, and the chairs ranged about in rows and in clusters. Each little family group had had its say and exchanged its domestic gossip earlier in the evening. There was now an apparent disposition to relax, to widen the circle of confidences and give a more general tone to the conversation. Many of the children had been permitted to sit up beyond their usual bedtime. A small band of them were lying on their stomachs on the floor, looking at the colored sheets of the comic papers which Mr. Pontellier had brought down. The little Pontellier boys were permitting them to do so and making their authority felt. Music, dancing, and recitation or two were the entertainments furnished, or rather offered. But there was nothing systematic about the program, no appearance of prearrangement, nor even premeditation. At an early hour in the evening, the Farival twins were prevailed upon to play the piano. They were girls of 14, always clad in the Virgin's colors, blue and white, having been dedicated to the Blessed Virgin at their baptism. They played a duet from Zamba, and at their earnest solicitation of everyone present, followed it to the overture to the Poet and Peasant. Like in the last one, again, think about religion, role of religion in this book. Allez-vous-en, sapristi, shrieked the parrot outside the door. He was the only being present who possessed sufficient candor to admit that he was not listening to these gracious performances for the first time that summer. Old Monsieur Farival, grandfather of the twins, grew indignant over the interruption and insisted upon having the bird removed and consigned to regions of darkness. Victor Lebrun objected, and his decrees were as immutable as those of fate. The parrot fortunately offered no further interruption to the entertainment, the whole venom of his nature apparently having been cherished up and hurled against the twins in that one impetuous outburst. Later, a young brother and sister gave recitations, which everyone present had heard many times at winter evening entertainments in the city. A little girl performed a skirt dance in the center of the floor. The mother played her accompaniments and at the same time watched her daughter with greedy admiration and nervous apprehension. She need have had no apprehension. The child was mistress of the situation. She had been properly dressed for the occasion in black tulle and black silk tights. Her little neck and arms were bare, and her hair, artificially crimped, stood out like fluffy black plumes over her head. Her poses were full of grace, and her little back-shod toes twinkled as they shot out and upward with the rapidity and suddenness which were bewildering. But there was no reason why everyone should not dance. Madame Ratignolle could not, so it was she who gaily consented to play for the others. She played very well, keeping excellent waltz times and infusing an expression into the strains which was indeed inspiring. She was keeping up her music on account of the children, she said, because she and her husband both considered it a means of brightening the home and making it attractive. Almost everyone danced but the twins, who could not be induced to separate during the brief period when one or the other should be whirling around the room in the arms of a man. They might have danced together, but they did not think of it. The children were sent to bed. Some went submissively, others with shrieks and protests as they were dragged away. They had been permitted to sit up till after the ice cream, which naturally marked the limit of human indulgence. The ice cream was passed around with cake, gold and silver cake arranged on platters in alternate slices. It had been made and frozen during the afternoon back of the kitchen by 2 black women under the supervision of Victor. It was pronounced a great success. Excellent if it had only contained a little less vanilla or a little more sugar, if it had been frozen a degree harder, and if the salt might have been kept out of portions of it. Victor was proud of his achievements and went about recommending it and urging everyone to partake of it to the excess. I want to talk for a second about old-time freezers. Remember, this is a book from the 1890s, so a freezer as we know it, the icebox as you know it, very different. Salt was still being used as a preserver. So they would pack salt in the ice cream, like around the ice cream to kind of keep it cold and intact. And then the freezer had a churner within it. So you really had to like keep the ice moving to keep it cold. And the ice cream of back then probably wouldn't have been that good. Sugar being expensive and hard to come by for people, and not having like the quantity allowed to make like a really big batch. But it's interesting how cute it is. Well, it was a success. People were upset that there was too much vanilla, not enough sugar, and there was salt in some of the bites. But kind of shows an optimism a little bit here on what is a good or a bad moment. After Mrs. Pontellier had danced twice with her husband, once with Robert and once with Monsieur Ratonneau, who was thin and tall and swayed like a reed in the wind when he danced, she went out on the gallery and seated herself on the low window-sill, where she commanded a view of all that went on in the hall and could look out toward the Gulf. Again, she's always looking at the water. There was a soft effulgence in the east. The moon was coming up, and its mystic shimmer was casting a million lights across the distant, restless water. "Would you like to hear Mademoiselle Reisz play?" asked Robert, coming out on the porch where she was. Of course, Edna would like to hear Mademoiselle Reisz play, but she feared it would be useless to entreat her. "I'll ask her," he said. "I'll tell her that you want to hear her. She likes you. She will come." He turned and hurried away to one of the far cottages where Mademoiselle Reisz was shuffling away. She was dragging a chair in and out of her room, and at intervals objecting to the crying of a baby, which a nurse in the adjoining cottage was endeavoring to put to sleep. She was a disagreeable little woman, no longer young, who had quarreled with almost everyone, owing to a temper which was self-assertive and a disposition to trample upon the rights of others. Robert prevailed upon her without any too great difficulty. She entered the hall with him during a lull in the dance. She made an awkward, imperious little bow, as she went in. She was a homely woman with a small, weazened face and body and eyes that glowed. She had absolutely no taste in dress and wore a batch of rusty black lace with a bunch of artificial violets pinned to the side of her hair. "Ask Mrs. Pontellier what she would like to hear me play," she requested of Robert. She sat perfectly still before the piano, not touching the keys, while Robert carried her message to Edna at the window. A general air of surprise and genuine satisfaction fell upon everyone as they saw the pianist enter. There was a settling down and a prevailing air of expectancy everywhere. Edna was a trifle embarrassed at being thus signaled out for the imperious little woman's favor. She would not dare to choose, and begged that Mademoiselle Reisz would please herself and her selections. Edna was what she herself called very fond of music. Oh my gosh, you guys, I'm too old. I have to turn on a light. I literally can't see anymore. Horrible. Okay. Okay. No, there goes my headphone. Musical strains, well rendered, had a way of evoking pictures in her mind. She sometimes liked to sit in the room of mornings when Madame Ratignolle played or practiced. One piece which that lady played, Edna had entitled Solitude. It was a short, plaintive minor strain. The name of the piece was something else, but she called it Solitude. When she heard it, there came before her imagination the figure of a man standing beside a desolate rock on the seashore. He was naked. His attitude was one of hopeless resignation as he looked toward a distant bird winging its flight away from him. Just so you know, Kate Chopin wanted to name this novella Solitude. Another piece called to her mind a dainty young woman clad in an empire gown with an empire waist, so it was really high up and showed her bosoms. Taking mincing dancing steps as she came down a long avenue between tall hedges. Again, another reminded her of children at play, and still another of nothing on earth but a demure lady stroking a cat. The very first chords which Mademoiselle Reisz struck upon the piano sent a keen tremor down Mrs. Pontellier's spinal column. It was not the first time she had heard an artist at the piano. Perhaps it was the first time she was ready. Perhaps the first time her being was tempered to take an impress at the abiding truth. She waited for the material pictures which she thought would gather and blaze before her imagination. She waited in vain. She saw no pictures of solitude, of hope, of longing, or of despair. But the very passions themselves were aroused within her soul, swaying it, lashing it, as the waves daily beat upon her splendid body. She trembled, she was choking, and the tears blinded her. Mademoiselle had finished. She arose, and bowing her stiff, lofty bow, she went away, stopping for neither thanks nor applause. As she passed along the gallery, she patted Edna upon the shoulder. "Well, how did you like my music?" she asked. The young woman was unable to answer. She pressed the hand of the pianist convulsively. Mademoiselle Reisz perceived her agitation and even her tears. She patted her again upon the shoulder as she said, "You are the only one worth playing for. Those others, bah!" She went shuffling and sidling down the gallery toward her room. But she was mistaken about the others. Her playing had aroused a fever of enthusiasm. What passion! What an artist! I have always said no one could play Chopin like Mademoiselle Reisz. That last prelude, bon Dieu, it shakes a man. Bon Dieu, my God. It was growing late, and there was a general disposition to disband. But someone, perhaps it was Robert, thought of a bath at that mystic hour and under the mystic moon. One thing to think about with this one, that's the end of chapter 9. If you have learned French in the past, the difference between Mademoiselle, Madame, and you notice it's Mrs. Pontellier. So Edna's not going by the French article of her name. She's not going with that French introduction. Mademoiselle, somebody who is not married. Madame, somebody who is married or is of that older respect, maybe even a widow. But this pianist is going by Mademoiselle, although she's not described as old. Something to think about. This is chapter 10. Here we go. We're 10 chapters in. Woohoo! At all events, Robert proposed it, and there was not a dissenting voice. There was not one but was ready to follow when he led the way. He did not lead the way, however, he directed the way, and he himself loitered behind the lovers who had betrayed a disposition to linger and hold themselves apart. He walked between them, whether with malicious or mischievous intent, it was not wholly clear, even to himself. The Pontelliers and Ratignolles walked ahead, the women leaning upon the arms of their husbands. Edna could hear Robert's voice behind them and could sometimes hear what he said. She wondered why he did not join them. It was unlike him not to. Of late, he had sometimes held away from her for an entire day, redoubling his devotion upon the next and the next as though to make up for hours that had been lost. She missed him the days when some pretext served to take him away from her, just as one misses the sun on a cloudy day without having thought much about the sun when it was shining. The people walked in little groups towards the beach. They talked and laughed. Some of them sang. There was a band playing down at Klein's hotel, and the strains reached them faintly, tempered by the distance. There were strange, rare odors abroad, a tangle of the sea smell and of weeds and damp, new plowed earth mingled with the heavy perfume of a field of white blossoms somewhere near. But the night sat lightly upon the sea and the land. There was no weight of darkness. There were no shadows. The white light of the moon had fallen upon the world like the mystery and the softness of sleep. Most of them walked into the water as though into a native element. The sea was quiet now and swelled lazily in broad billows that melted into one another and did not break except upon the beach in little foamy crests that coiled back like slow white serpents. Edna had attempted all summer to learn to swim. She had received instructions from both the men and women, in some of the instances from the children. Robert had pursued a system of lessons almost daily, and he was nearly at the point of discouragement in realizing the futility of his efforts. A certain ungovernable dread hung about her when in the water, unless there was a hand nearby that could reach out and reassure her. Sounds like me. But that night she was like the little tottering, stumbling, and clutching child who of a sudden realizes its powers and walks for the first time alone, boldly and with overconfidence. She could have shouted for joy. She did shout for joy, as with a sweeping stroke or two, she lifted her body to the surface of the water. A feeling of exultation overtook her, as if some power of significant import had been given her to control the working of her body and her soul. She wanted to swim far out, where no woman had swum before. Her unlooked-for achievement was the subject of wonder, applause, and admiration. Each one congratulated himself that his special teachings had accomplished this desired end. How easy it is, she thought. It is nothing, she said out loud. Why did I not discover before that it was nothing? Think of the time I have lost splashing about like a baby. She would not join the groups in their sports and bouts, but intoxicated with her newly conquered power, she swam out alone. She turned her face seaward to gather in an impression of space and solitude, which the vast expanse of water meeting and melting with the moonlit sky conveyed to her excited fancy. As she swam, she seemed to be reaching out for the unlimited in which to lose herself. Once she turned and looked toward the shore, toward the people she had left there. She had not gone any great distance. That is, what would have been a great distance for an experienced swimmer. But to her unaccustomed vision, the stretch of water behind her assumed the aspect of a barrier which her unaided strength would never be able to overcome. A quick vision of death smote her soul. That is the past tense of smite. And for a second of time appalled and enfeebled her senses. But by an effort she rallied her staggering faculties and managed to regain the land. She made no mention of her encounter with death and her flash of terror, except to say to her husband, I thought I should have perished out there alone. You were not so very far, my dear. I was watching you, he told her. Edna went at once to the bathhouse, and she had put on her dry clothes, and she was ready to return home before the others had left the water. She started to walk away alone. They all called to her and shouted to her. She waved a dissenting hand and went on, paying no further heed to their renewed cries, which sought to detain her. Sometimes I am tempted to think that Miss Pontellier is capricious. Capricious is indecisive or fickle, said Madame Lebrun, who was amusing herself immensely and feared that Edna's abrupt departure might put an end to this pleasure. I know she is, assented Mr. Pontellier. Sometimes, not often. Edna had not traversed a quarter of the distance on her way home before she was overtaken by Robert. Do you think I was afraid? She asked him, without a shade of annoyance. No, I knew you weren't afraid. Then why did you come? Why didn't you stay out there with the others? I never thought of it. Thought of what? Of anything. What difference does it make? I'm very tired, she uttered complainingly. I know you are. You don't know anything about it. Why should you know? I never was so exhausted in my life. But it isn't unpleasant. 1,000 emotions have swept through me tonight. I don't comprehend half of them. Don't mind what I'm saying. I'm just thinking out loud. I wonder if I shall ever be stirred again as Mademoiselle Reisz's playing moved me tonight. I wonder if any night on earth will ever again be like this one. It is like a night in a dream. The people about me are like some uncanny, half-human beings. There must be spirits abroad tonight. There are, whispered Robert. Didn't you know that this was the 28th of August? The 28th of August, yes. On the 28th of August at the hour of midnight, and that the moon is shining. The moon must be shining. A spirit that has haunted these shores for ages rises up in the gulf. With its own penetrating vision, the spirit seeks someone mortal worthy to hold him company, worthy of being exalted for a few hours into the realms of the semi-celestials. His search has always hitherto been fruitless, and he has sunk back, disheartened, into the sea. But tonight he found Mrs. Pontellier. Perhaps he will never wholly release her from the spell. Perhaps she will never again suffer a poor, unworthy earthling to walk in the shadow of her divine presence. Pause. So that 28th of August, in the text of my book, it made a note to a callback from what we read in first semester. We read Walt Whitman. We read a bunch of his poems from Leaves of Grass. And in that, there is a moment in Walt's writing which he talks about the age of a woman. And he uses the number 28. Now, we know Robert is 26, and we know that Edna is 2 years older than him. So what age is she? 28. We'll talk about that Walt Whitman reference in class when we can. Very interesting, though. Back to the book. Don't banter me, she said, wounded at what appeared to be his flippancy. He did not mind the entreaty, but the tone, with its delicate note of pathos, there's one of our vocab words, was like a reproach. He could not explain. He could not tell her that he had penetrated her mood and understood. He said nothing except to offer her his arm, for, by her own admission, she was exhausted. She had been walking alone with her arms hanging limp, letting her white skirts trail along the dewy path. She took his arm, but she did not lean upon it. She let her hand lie listlessly, as though her thoughts were elsewhere, somewhere in the advance of her body, and she was striving to overtake them. Robert assisted her into the hammock, which sprung from the post before her door, out on the trunk of a tree. Will you stay out here and wait for Mr. Pontellier? He asked. I'll stay out here. Good night. Shall I get you a pillow? There's one here, she said, feeling about, for they were in the shadow. It must be soiled. The children have been tumbling it about. No matter. And having discovered the pillow, she adjusted it beneath her head. She extended herself in the hammock with a deep breath of relief. She was not a supercilious or an over-dainty woman. She was not much given to reclining in the hammock. And when she did so, it was with no cat-like suggestion of a voluptuous ease, but with a beneficent repose, which seemed to invade her whole body. Shall I stay with you till Mr. Pontellier comes? Asked Robert, seating himself on the outer edge of one of the steps and taking hold of the hammock rope, which was fastened to the post. If you wish. Don't swing the hammock. Will you get my white shawl, which I left on the windowsill over the house? Are you chilly? No, but I shall be presently. Presently? He laughed. Do you know what time it is? How long are you going to stay out here? I don't know. Will you get the shawl? Of course I will, he said, rising. He went over to the house, walking along the grass. She watched his figure pass in and out of the strips of moonlight. It was past midnight. It was very quiet. When he returned with the shawl, she took it and kept it in her hand. She did not put it around her. Did you say I should stay till Mr. Pontellier came back? I said you might if you wished to. He seated himself again and rolled a cigarette, which he smoked in silence. Neither did Mrs. Pontellier speak. No multitude of words could have been more significant than those moments of silence, or more pregnant with the first felt throbbings of desire. When the voices of the bathers were heard approaching, Robert said, "Good night." She did not answer him. He thought she was asleep. Again, she watched his figure pass in and out of the strips of moonlight as he walked away. Okay, that's the end of 10. 10 chapters in. We got a lot about color, what she's been wearing, what the women have been wearing in general, her and Robert's relationship. What the hell is going on? We talked about that a little bit in class when I told you that there was an air of more liberalness, a little bit more fancy feeling when it came to relationships compared to her kind of more conservative Southern. But it seems like here she's starting to dabble a little bit into something else. We'll see.